Even among notorious violent offenders, there are people who stand out because of their particular cunning and cruelty. True monsters. Today's story is about exactly such monsters in human form. The desire for adventure is characteristic of certain personality types. However, such desires can be full of danger. When a person ventures far away from familiar surroundings, they risk encountering aggressive people and sometimes even real monsters. Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton met during their school days, when they were both teenagers. This meeting proved to be fateful. From that moment on, they felt deeply connected to each other. Peta's calm and balanced nature counterbalanced Chris's impulsiveness. Their relationship developed gradually, consciously, and maturely. Aware of how important a solid foundation would be for their future family happiness, the couple decided to postpone marriage until they had completed their studies. They agreed on this. Before starting a family, they needed to achieve financial stability and security for the future. Chris insisted on this position because he sincerely believed that a family should be built on a firm financial foundation, and Peta shared his conviction. The young couple were sociable and active. They regularly attended lively parties and other events. Even as a young boy, Chris had firmly decided to dedicate his life to medicine and become a doctor. This intention became the foundation of his entire life. At the age of 25, Chris successfully completed his medical studies and earned his degree, while his partner completed her law degree. They grew up in Greater Manchester, England. Chris came from a large family. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Thanks to their hard work and determination, the couple managed to become financially independent from their parents, succeed in prestigious professions, and build a respectable life for themselves. Their love of travel led them on fascinating journeys through various European countries, exotic places such as Morocco and other parts of the world. In 1777, the young man and his companion left home and set out on a long journey around the world. They wanted to celebrate their success and reflect on their future. After traveling for several months through the vastness of Australia, where they enjoyed the beauty and culture of the country, the young couple set off for the Pacific Islands, continued along the west coast of the United States, and eventually reached Central America. Chris carefully documented the journey with notes and video recordings, creating an impressive archive of memories that captured the unique moments of the trip. The filmed material was regularly sent home to the family, along with letters, allowing their loved ones to experience the events through Chris's eyes, even though they were far away. In June 1978, Chris and Peta's families received another letter from them. The couple reported that they had met an American sailor and yacht captain named Silas Duane, who had offered them a short cruise along the Caribbean coast. For them, this seemed like a wonderful opportunity to combine pleasure with adventure and spend part of their trip on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since childhood. He spoke enthusiastically about his new acquaintance, Captain Duane Boston, whose boat also carried 2 boys, his own sons, Vince and Russell. The trip was supposed to last about 2 weeks, so the families expected the next letter to arrive later than usual. However, much more time passed before the relatives heard from the couple again, and their concern began to grow. The journey should not have posed any serious problems for Chris and Peta. The couple had already faced many different challenges and had managed them successfully. In addition, Chris knew a great deal about sailing. Since childhood, he had pursued his favorite pastime and had crossed small bodies of water many times in his boat. Captain Duane Boston jokingly referred to himself as a true Caribbean pirate, and this description proved to be more accurate than it initially seemed. As he himself admitted, he transported passengers on his approximately 10-meter-long yacht. At first, the journey seemed varied and exciting. Most days were active and included fishing, walks along beaches, and exploring interesting places through dense tropical forests. The young couple were euphoric and enjoyed every moment they spent together. When the time came to return to port, the captain was supposed to take the passengers to a place from which they could continue their journey and visit new destinations. In one of the messages he sent during the trip, Chris shared his observations about the owner of the yacht and pointed out his excessive cruelty. The captain's children did most of the work on board, obeyed their strict father, and were cruelly punished even for the smallest offense. According to Duane Boston, this method of upbringing helped form the character of a real man and a true sailor. Such an approach stood in sharp contrast to the views of Chris and Peta, who were shocked by such harsh methods. However, the young couple had no real choice. They hoped to get through the 2 weeks on the yacht without conflict. Duane Boston's son later recalled that the voyage initially proceeded quite calmly, like an ordinary trip. Nevertheless, the atmosphere began to deteriorate because of the cramped conditions on board and small quarrels. Gradually, the tension reached a critical point as open dislike developed among the adults on the boat. Even the children constantly argued over trivial things because their father was cruel and resorted to corporal punishment and public humiliation. Chris later sent his parents a message, informing them that their itinerary had changed. They had decided to end the sailing trip early and disembark in Livingston, Guatemala. From there, Peta planned to travel onward, while Chris intended to continue his own route. Describing the conditions aboard Duane Boston's yacht, Chris expressed growing dissatisfaction. This was primarily caused by the cramped space on deck, which left him with no personal privacy. The constant closeness to the crew, especially the rude captain, became a source of tension and irritation. Nevertheless, the group continued their island-hopping journey. At one point, the captain dropped anchor near another island. Around noon, the crew went ashore and headed toward an old lighthouse near which a party was taking place. The party, with its barbecue and abundance of alcoholic drinks, lifted everyone's spirits. The entire group gave themselves over to the celebration, which later became one of the last beautiful memories before the tragic end. The following days were marked by a disturbing silence from the young travelers. This caused their relatives to worry. Peta also sent letters to her family. In her last message, the young woman complained about the tense atmosphere aboard the yacht. Duane constantly criticized his sons and expressed dissatisfaction with every little thing. She felt that he had a difficult personality and that the situation was becoming unbearable. The Perfect Advent Gift is available on Amazon. Link in the description. Unfortunately, the interruption in communication between Chris and his relatives was soon followed by silence from Peta as well. What exactly happened after that was not immediately clear. The situation was made even more difficult by the limited communication possibilities of that time. The parents learned that Guatemala was then in the middle of an active phase of civil war. Although Livingston was far from the main combat zones, the presence of foreign nationals still created increased risk. The region was full of criminal gangs, and the trade in illegal substances was one of their main sources of income. This information caused deep concern and raised serious doubts about the fate of the young couple. Guatemala's dense forests were an ideal place to kidnap unsuspecting travelers and hide their bodies. If local gangs abducted tourists, the chances of finding them were very small. Moreover, getting lost in the jungle almost certainly meant death, especially for unprepared travelers. The relatives of Chris and Peta joined forces and made desperate attempts to locate the couple. The family sent inquiries and appeals to numerous institutions in Central America, contacting city authorities, state authorities, prisons, police stations, morgues, and hospitals. However, the search produced no significant results. The parents panicked, because months passed without any information about their children's fate. Realizing the gravity of the situation, they hired a private investigator in Belize. The detective immediately began his inquiries and contacted a local Guatemalan priest who shared a crucial piece of information. The bodies of two unidentified young people of European appearance, a man and a woman, had been found nearby. It was highly likely that these were the bodies of Chris and Peta. Any remaining hope that the couple's mail had simply been delayed was finally shattered. The discovery was grim. Local fishermen found two human bodies not far from the shore. The victims had been brutally murdered. Their hands and feet were bound. Plastic bags had been placed over their heads, and weights had been attached to their limbs to prevent them from rising to the surface after they were thrown into the sea. It was obvious that the cause of death was deliberate murder. The forensic examination revealed signs of severe physical abuse and torture. It became clear that the victims had still been alive when they were thrown into the sea. This was a devastating blow to the families. They felt that the victims were their loved ones. Since the victims' identities were unknown when the bodies were discovered, they were buried in an ordinary Guatemalan cemetery in an unmarked grave with white crosses. To identify the victims, the bodies had to be exhumed and their dental records from the United Kingdom compared. The process was slowed by technical problems and a lack of attention from local authorities. Everything encountered bureaucratic obstacles. Only after a long time and much effort was it officially confirmed that the deceased were indeed the missing couple, Chris Farsar and Peta Frampton. The victims' families were tormented by one question: who could have committed such a crime against their beloved children? The young man and woman were considered quiet, friendly people with no connection to crime. Their families could not imagine why anyone would want to take their lives. Sadly, the answers to these questions came only 37 years later. Investigators on both sides of the Atlantic worked on the case, but they were unable to uncover the truth. As early as 1981, English police officially closed the case without informing the victims' families. For years, Chris's younger sister, Penny Farmer, sent letters connected to her older brother, remembered important dates such as birthdays and other holidays, and hoped for answers, but in vain. All of this had a profound emotional impact on the relatives of both families, who had to cope with the loss of their beloved son and daughter. Endless calls and inquiries to foreign authorities, ORCs, newspaper offices, and law enforcement agencies produced no result. The families tried with all their strength to achieve justice and speed up the investigation. Chris's father waited in vain for answers. He died in 2013. Finally, Chris's sister took matters into her own hands. Penny's talent as an internet investigator awakened. She decided to begin her own search for the truth. The initial information was extremely limited. The only real clue was the name of the boat on which the couple had made their final voyage. Thanks to her persistence, Penny managed to track down a man named Silas Duane Boston, the owner of the sailing vessel Justin B. Young couple, the Young had embarked on their fateful journey on this very boat. Using information from the letters, she reconstructed the key details of the events. Her brother and his partner had described their encounter with the American sailor and his 2 children, who were accompanying them on their Caribbean cruise. It was determined that Chris and Peta were last seen aboard the vessel Justin B., which belonged to a man from California named Silas Duane Boston. Their last letters clearly indicated that they were suspicious of the yacht's owner, that they disliked him, and that tensions existed between them. Duane Boston became a murder suspect. However, there was not enough evidence to prove his guilt. Then Penny suddenly had an idea. Several years earlier, she had created an anonymous social media account to secretly monitor her son's activities. At the time, this had seemed as like a justified safety measure. Now, she decided to use the account in a completely different way. To uncover the circumstances of the tragedy connected to Duane Boston's name, she decided to contact the suspects' adult sons, Vince and Russell, because she also believed they might have been involved in the double murder. Using that account, she found the brothers' social media profiles. At the time of the crime, the boys had been children. Now they were adults. It was possible to speak with them. The conversation began with a direct question. Penny explained that she knew about the tragedy and wanted to understand the circumstances surrounding the deaths of her loved ones. One of the men ignored the message, while the other agreed to discuss the situation further. It later emerged that both brothers were under immense psychological pressure because of the incident and deeply regretted that tragic day. According to Vince, his father was a real monster. He abused alcohol, was violent, and terrorized everyone around him. Once, after drinking too much, he lost control and committed a double murder directly on board the yacht. He killed Chris and Peta. The memories of these events were so traumatic that they were burned into Vince's mind forever. He suffered from nightmares for many years. Under the influence of his conversation with Penny, Duane Boston's eldest son finally recognized the need to free himself from the burden of the past. In October 2015, he went to a police station in Sacramento and described the details of the crime to officers. Investigators took the information seriously and carefully examined the archives of the 37-year-old case. Thanks to the combined efforts of British and American law enforcement, enough evidence was gathered. In 2016, Silas Duane Boston, the owner of the sailboat, was formally charged with double murder. Vince confirmed that he, like his younger brother, had personally witnessed the crime. He described the details of what happened. First, the captain brutally beat Chris, forcibly removed his clothing, and tied his hands and feet. Then, he attached several metal engine parts, which he had found on the boat, to Chris's body. The living and helpless young man was thrown overboard, despite the resistance of the children, who were powerless against their father. Shortly afterward, screams from a woman could be heard below deck, where Peta was being held captive. After some time, she shared her companion's fate. Of course, neither of them had any chance of survival. Looking back on the past, Vince expressed deep sorrow over the oppressive atmosphere of domestic violence that dominated the family. Instead of ordinary childhood joys, such as playing ball or riding bicycles, their father involved the boys in thefts and robberies, making them accomplices in his crimes. The brothers tried to resist their father's will, for which they were often punished again. Vince was relieved that, after decades of being ignored, he was finally being listened to and believed. In the online investigation initiated by Penny, Vince, who became the main witness to the crime, played a key role. At first, he was afraid even to share these experiences with his younger brother, who had also witnessed the murder. After the crime, their father categorically forbade anyone from speaking about what had happened and threatened them with death if they went to the police. He assured the children that he had to eliminate the young couple because they might inform the authorities about his illegal activities. The perpetrator emphasized that nobody liked traitors and threatened anyone who tried to reveal the truth with a similar fate. The cruel tyrant managed to break the will of his underage children by imposing unbearable living conditions on them. The boys did not have the courage to openly oppose him, even when they became adults. Later, the eldest son repeatedly tried to contact the police. However, every complaint was dismissed by investigators or considered not credible. At first, Penny saw the defendant's sons as possible accomplices in the murder. Over time, she became convinced that they too were victims of the tyrant. They had lived for many years in fear and helplessness. The children became victims of circumstance, and Chris and Peta's fate was practically sealed the moment they boarded the boat. It later turned out that the perpetrator had lured them aboard under the guise of a romantic cruise that promised unforgettable experiences. The first few days of the voyage were quite pleasant. The couple spent time on the water, visited remote places, and admired the beauty of nature. But the reality was far darker than the descriptions in the advertisements. It turned out that the carefree Captain Duane Boston was hiding the dark side of a hardened criminal who was fleeing the law. He and his children were trying to avoid prosecution for serious crimes in California. The fugitive criminal saw the young tourists as easy prey and had apparently planned to approach a secluded area where he could steal the passengers' valuables and money without interference. Further investigation into the criminal's activities revealed that the tragedy that befell Chris and Peta might not have been the only act of violence committed by Silas Duane Boston. He had previously been the main suspect in the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Mary Lou Boston. She vanished without a trace shortly after announcing her intention to file for divorce and take custody of the children. The killer's son, Vince, claimed that in 1968, when he and his brother were very young, their mother left home and never returned. Their father told them that their mother had abandoned them. The brothers suffered greatly because of the disappearance of their beloved mother and were left in the care of their despotic father. As Vince grew older, he concluded that a father capable of murdering two strangers could also have delivered a fatal blow to his wife. His parents apparently helped him afterward by buying him the sailboat Justin B. Furthermore, Duane Boston had a strong motive to get rid of his wife. He did not want to divorce her, divide his property, give up custody of the children, or pay alimony. The grandmother told the children that Duane had confessed to her that he had shot his wife in the back and then hidden her body somewhere. Mary Lou Boston was never found. Later, his involvement in her death could not be proven because of a lack of evidence. The brothers repeatedly tried to find out the circumstances of their mother's death. However, their father avoided the subject every time they tried to raise it. Once, during one of his drunken outbursts, he brutally punished the children for asking questions about their mother. From then on, they were afraid to mention the subject. The childhood and adolescence of Vince and Russell Boston were a constant balancing act on the edge of danger. Their father, who frequently suffered from alcoholism, transformed into an aggressive and unpredictable tyrant, ready to unleash his anger on his children. Duane became dangerous, constantly yelling at the boys and starting fights at the slightest provocation. For them, this boat trip was one of the most horrific experiences of their lives. The children constantly feared that they might suffer the same fate as Chris and Peta. Duane usually organized day fishing trips for tourists and only once decided to undertake a longer voyage with two innocent victims. When Vince remembered the deceased couple, he noted that Chris and Peta were distinguished by their kindness and attentiveness to others. Every evening, they devoted time to the boys, teaching them new skills and sharing knowledge with them. This warmth created positive emotions in the children, who had experienced few joyful moments since the disappearance of their mother. At first, communication on board was calm. The new passengers seemed to soften the cruel captain's temper. Outwardly, Duane behaved hospitably and tried to make a good impression. But then his masks slipped again, revealing the rudeness and cruelty that characterized his daily life. Every mistake or failure by the children triggered outbursts of rage and severe punishment. For a long time, Chris and Peta preferred not to comment on his parenting and listened to Duane's explanations about the importance of a strict approach to raising children. They did not want to interfere in other people's affairs, but the tension continued to grow. The problem was the complete isolation inside the cramped space of the small yacht, where it was impossible to find privacy or escape the children's screams and the captain's constant pressure. One evening, the captain got drunk again. Duane attacked his sons and began brutally beating them. The behavior of the boat's owner provoked a protest from Chris, who openly spoke out against such treatment of children. In his intoxicated state, Duane reacted aggressively and tried to hit Chris, but Chris dodged the blow. The attacker fell overboard. After being helped back onto the deck, he felt intense resentment and hatred toward Chris. The next morning, The couple expressed their desire to leave the yacht and dock at the nearest shore. Instead of granting their request, the perpetrator attacked Chris from behind, taking advantage of a moment when he was distracted. The first powerful blow rendered him unconscious. Duane then tied him up and repeatedly punched him in the chest. After that, he went below deck, grabbed Peta, beat her, and tied her up as well. The day became a series of torment for the passengers, who were subjected to various forms of violence. The two boys who witnessed the events were torn between the desire to help the couple and the fear of endangering their own lives. Terrified and confused, the children were powerless to influence what was happening. The young woman, fearing her approaching fate, cursed the killer. Chris and Peta remained steadfast and calm, refusing to show weakness to their attacker. At dawn the next day, the yacht's owner announced news that seemed to delight everyone. According to him, they would soon be ashore and would be freed from their bonds. However, hope quickly turned into horror when he sailed the yacht a considerable distance from land and mocked them. He heaped plastic bags over the couple's heads, tied their hands and feet, attached heavy weights to them, and then threw Chris and Peta into the sea, down toward the ocean floor. Now law enforcement faced the task of finding the killer. It turned out that after the attack, Duane Boston had left the area, with only himself and his sons on board. Upon returning to California, he soon sold his yacht. Contact was made with the main suspect, but he claimed that he had dropped his companions off near Livingston after accusing them of using and selling illegal substances. He suggested that the tourists might have encountered unforeseen dangers in a foreign country. The families of the deceased firmly rejected the perpetrator's version of events. The couple had nothing to do with crime or illegal substances. This position was also supported by Duane's sons, who actively participated in the investigation, since the crime had occurred before their eyes. However, it proved difficult to arrest the perpetrator and bring him to justice. For a long time, he remained beyond the reach of law enforcement. Bureaucratic obstacles significantly slowed the investigation and left the problem unresolved for decades. Justice could not be achieved for Chris and Peta during the lifetime of the suspect. When the perpetrator was arrested in California in late 2016, his health quickly deteriorated while he was in custody. In April 2017, Silas Duane Boston died while awaiting trial. The medical examination revealed severe health problems, including cardiovascular and liver disease. Doctors determined that after being informed about his approaching trial, he refused to follow medical advice and take his prescribed medication, which caused his health to worsen rapidly. Penny Farmer, Chris's sister, saw this as an act of cowardice and a refusal to be held accountable for his actions. In her opinion, he deliberately chose to let his life end rather than appear in court and admit his guilt. Chris's family felt that the perpetrator's death was yet another blow because it destroyed their hope for justice. Peta's parents also passed away and did not live to see this case resolved. Thank you for watching, and take care.